the session, and let me share my screen. Okay, share the screen. Share my desktop. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. If there is anybody who is online who is not on mute, I ask you to actually, you know what, let me go ahead and mute everybody. That way we don't have any problems during. Okay. All right. Just like I spoke about last time, as we continue our lecture series on the concept of self-discipline in Islam, one thing that I wanted to expound upon and and talk about in a lot more detail is the concept of wealth, and specifically when it comes to our money and what we earn. That includes, but not limited to, everything that we're going to talk about today, such as what is the concept of ownership in Islam? When we say that we own something or our wealth, etc., what do we mean by that? How are property rights and the rights of being able to conduct transactions, etc., and being able to possess material possessions in this world, all of it stems from this concept of ownership. But what is the concept of ownership in Islam? I'm going to talk about that today. And from that, when it comes to ownership, when we come into possession of material wealth in this world, what is our role and what is our responsibility when it comes to that material possession that we possess in this world? And then I'm going to give you some reasonable definitions, I hope, during the course of the lecture, as to what exactly is material wealth and what Islam considers to be material wealth. And I'll give you some pointers on what Islam considers part of your wealth that you should pay zakat on, and what Islam does not consider that. This lecture obviously is not about the fiqh of zakat. There's a lot more detail when it comes to the fiqh of zakat. This is not about that. And I'm going to end today's lecture on that note, inshallah. But on next week, I'm going to go into a lot more detail on how to earn wealth and what are some things we can do in order to earn wealth. And this is going to be an important topic, is because how we earn wealth determines also how we spend it, etc. Both of these are flip sides of the same coin. How we earn it, how we spend it, are both topics that we're inshallah going to discuss next week. So that is on our agenda for this particular talk. So let's get started. Okay, wealth and ownership. When it comes to ownership and wealth, we cannot talk about this subject without first talking about one of the three categories of tawheed. And if you remember my lecture, I think I gave that lecture like 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, on the three categories of tawheed. Meaning we consider Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, number one, the first of the three categories is what we call tawheed al-rubobiyah. And the second one is tawheed al-uluhiyah, and the third one is tawheed al-asma wa sifat. Meaning, number one, tawheed al-rubobiyah is that we consider only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be the owner of everything, and that He is the creator, He is the owner of everything, He is running the affairs of His creation, meaning He is actively involved in what happens and what doesn't happen in this world. And He is the king, and He has dominion over His creation. That is the concept of tawheed al-rububiyah. Now, this is the first category of tawheed, and tawheed al-uluhiyah is that only Allah has the right to be worshipped. That's the second category. And the third and final category is tawheed al-asma wa sifat, meaning that only Allah is deserving of the perfect and most beautiful names, and He embodies all those perfection that is within those names, and we do not ascribe those characteristics and those properties, those properties of perfection, those characteristics of perfection to anyone or anything except other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But today, in order to discuss the concept of wealth of ownership, we have to discuss in a little bit what is meant by tawheed rubobiyah. Tawheed rubobiyah is the first category of tawheed in which we deem and in which we are taught, in which we consider that only Allah is the owner of everything. He is the one who created it, and He is the one who is actively involved in running everything that happens in this world and doesn't happen in this world. This, I hope, this verse will be memorized, and it should be memorized by everyone listening. And this is in Surah Al-Fatihah, which is the very first verse. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. That all praise is due to the Lord of the worlds. Now, Lord or Rabb in Arabic encompasses 3 and 4 things approximately. The whoever created, whoever owns, whoever runs the affairs, or whoever actively manages something, and whoever is the king or whoever has dominion. All 4 of these words is considered Rabb, meaning that He is the owner, Allah is the owner of both worlds, meaning this current world and the world that is coming hereafter. He is the creator of this world and the world that is coming hereafter, and everything that happens, and He has dominion and kingship of everything. This is the tawheed rububiyah, and this is discussed in the very first verse, and I hope, of Surah Al-Fatihah, and I hope this is something that we recite at least 5 times, or at least if we count at least 15 to 17 times a day, whether it's Friday or not. But this is what we mean by tawheed al-rububiyah. We acknowledge and we know that ultimately everything, it belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah is the owner of everything. And we must not confuse the fact that we are temporary owners of what we have, but we must not be laboring under some kind of misconception that somehow this world, or what we own in this world, or what we have in this world, somehow belongs to us. Because eventually and ultimately everything does belong to Allah. This is not just a blank statement. The proof can be given into a very, very simple mental exercise and a very simple concept, that if we think that we somehow own what we have, somehow we own our bank balances or our houses or our cars, etc., Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cure us of this misconception when we die. And I have seen this over and over, and everybody who is listening to this talk will have seen this over and over again in their lives. Meaning, everyone who dies leaves everything that they thought they possessed behind. Meaning, both my grandfathers and both my grandmothers have passed away, and many people, some of my friends, some of my close family have in fact passed away. And everything that they possessed is left in this world. And where are they? They are gone from this world. They are dead. And all of us will eventually, we are going to die. And if we are laboring under some kind of misconception, if we think that our house is somehow ours, or actually ours, or ultimately ours, we do possess it in the sense that we are temporary owners until we die. We have some dominion over these material possessions. But if we are somehow laboring under this misconception that we somehow actually own it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cure us of this misconception when we die. When we die, we will know exactly what we possessed and what we did not possess. In fact, in Surah Al-Ankabut, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ ثُمَّ إِلَيْنَا تُرْجَعُونَ. Every soul shall taste death, and then to us will you be returned. Meaning, you think you own yourself, but no, you will taste death, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your property, everything ultimately belongs to Allah, and upon your death, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take back ownership of His possession. Who owns us? Allah does. And how will He take possession back of what He owns? He will cause death to come to us. Every single one of us, death will come to us. And by doing that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will return our souls, our bodies to Himself, and eventually everything we own ultimately will be in His possession. So we must not think that we somehow own this or anything that we have in this world or anything we possess in this world. Our role is more of what we call, or what we like to call, or what the English translation of the word khalifa is. Our role is a vicegerent. We are here temporarily, 60, 70, 80 years, if you live that long, and most people in the world don't live that long. But because ultimately everything belongs to Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take back possession of everything He owns, we are acting on His behalf. We are acting as His khalifa, as His vicegerent, as His subordinate. And this is also discussed very shortly after Surah Al-Fatihah and Surah Al-Baqarah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. What is our role as vicegerent? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in this verse the purpose of our existence. Why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to create us in this world. وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً قَالُوا أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ قال إني أعلم ما لا تعلمون. And mention, O Muhammad, when your Lord said to the angels, indeed, I will make upon the earth a successive authority. What a beautiful translation here. A vicegerent or successive authority. Someone who acts on someone else's behalf. Our responsibility is to act on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and according to the wishes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we come to this world. Now, what is the counter to that? What is the possibility that the angels are trying to sound the alarm bells here? The angels are saying, well, if you place someone in this world, the angel said, will you place upon it who will cause corruption therein and shed blood? Meaning that if we don't act as a vicegerent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will cause corruption and even bloodshed. Yes, upon how many times have we heard, how many times have we seen, have people come to blows or even killed each other over material possessions? If we do not act according to the wishes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we endanger ourselves and we endanger those around us. We can cause corruption. And in fact, we can cause bloodshed to occur upon this planet. Our job is to act on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and according to His wishes. So whatever, and as our role, and in our role as a vicegerent or successive authority or someone who acts on behalf of someone else, we are expected to dispose of what we possess in this world, whatever we own, whatever we have, according to the wishes of the real owner. We are not expected to possess or to dispose of what we think we own in this world or whatever we have temporarily dominion over in this world, according to the wishes of the real owner. Where we cannot dispose of these things according to our wishes. We cannot say, well, it's my money, I can do whatever I want. No, you cannot. Because ultimately, ultimately, the money that we possess, the material possessions that we have, don't belong to us. They're not ours. And if we somehow continue to labor under some kind of misconception that it is somehow ours, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cure us of this misconception when we die. You're going to die. It'll become patently obvious to you what you didn't possess. But because as Muslims, we act as vicegerents, as successive authorities for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we dispose of what we possess in this world according to the wishes of Allah, who is the real owner. It is also because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the real owner, and He will ultimately take possession of what He owns, but also out of a sense of obligation, out of a sense of being obligated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because these benefits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided us, that we use to earn our wealth. For example, our limbs, our eyes, our brains, our bodies, these are the things that we use every day in order to earn what we have, right? But where did these come from? These benefits, these gifts are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are what we use to obtain everything. Without them, how could we be wealthy? Without a working mind, without a working brain, without a working body, how can we come into any material possessions? We can't. So ultimately, not only because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the owner of everything, we dispose of our affairs or dispose of what we possess materially according to His wishes because of a sense of obligation and thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us to acknowledge or be thankful, to have shukr of Him by disposing of what we possess according to what He thinks, by giving zakat and by giving charity. We cannot act on our wealth as if we own it, because A, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately owns it. B, Allah will take possession of it. C, out of a sense of obligation and thankfulness, we should be disposing it according to Allah's wishes. So we should be giving zakat and charity. In Surah Al-Baqarah, in the second verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون. Those who believe in the unseen and establish the prayers and spend out of that what we have provided. Meaning, I should have put the context in, but the context goes as follows. Alif Lam Mim, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. In this book is guidance for those who have fear or taqwa of Allah, or are mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching over them. And those who believe in the unseen establish the prayer and give out of and spend out of what we have provided them. This is the characteristic of those who are الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون. These are the rightly guided people, and these are the ones who are and eventually will be successful. So we must dispose of what we own and what we think we own according to the wishes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But, however, we must come to a quick concept. We must come to an understanding of what wealth is. Now, this is where on this slide, I'm going to go slightly, I'm going to say educational. and perhaps slightly secular, in the sense that I'm going to give you the number one, what the fundamental accounting equation is and what that means, and what Islam considers material possession, etc. So let's get into this particular slide. All of our material possessions. Now, this is the reason I'm saying this is because we think, or when we come to think what wealth is, we come to think of what money is or how much money we have in the bank. That's not what Islam considers wealth. Any material possession, including money, including our house, including our car, including our clothes, including our jewelries, including our electronic equipment, including our sports equipment, anything we possess, anything physical, material that we possess. Now, ultimately, money, because, well, some of you might be thinking that the money that we have in the bank is not really material. It's just a bunch of numbers written in a computer, right? No, that is actually a representation of value, of a representation of real world wealth. That's all it is, and therefore it is included in it. That's what Islam, and that is a definition of what, quote unquote, our material wealth is. However, not all of our material possessions are included in what we must pay zakat on. Some are included, what we pay zakat on, but not every material possession that we have is included in zakat. Some of the things that are excluded out of the zakat are those things that, for example, we use on a day-to-day basis. For example, our clothes, our house, etc. Those things, some of the, for example, there might be differences. For example, if I use a cell phone on a day-to-day basis, or if I use a watch on a day-to-day basis, my glasses, etc. These things, even though they're considered material possessions, they're not included in the zakat. This lecture is not about the specific rulings related to zakat. Okay? Inshallah, if we get to it in the future, we will discuss that. But this lecture is not about that. What Islam considers wealth is not just our material possession. Why is that? And let me give you a much closer concept of what Islam considers to be wealth. Before we get into what Islam considers to be wealth, I'm going to give you a quick side note on what I believe in accounting is called the fundamental accounting equation. That's the name of this equation. That's the first equation that you on your screen, which is called equity equals assets minus liabilities. I know there are some children. Let me give you a quick explanation of what this fundamental accounting equation actually means. Islam's concept of wealth is a lot closer to what we call equity in the accounting equation, accounting sense of the word. Now, what do we mean by equity? What do we mean by equity? Let's assume that someone has, and all they have is $1,000 in the bank. Actually, let's keep it a lot simpler. Let's say he has $100 in the bank, and or $100 bill. Let's assume. And that's his only possession. He has nothing else to his name in his world, right? He owns nothing else. It's a hypothetical scenario. Obviously, he has to own something else. He has to own some clothes but this is just a mental exercise I want you to consider. This is what we call an asset that person possesses. He has $100 in his possession. That is the value, the total value of his assets. Okay? But let's assume, for argument's sake, that this person also happens to owe someone $50. Meaning, he bought something from someone or got food from someone and ate it, but hasn't paid for it yet. And let's assume that he owes that person $50. For the sake of simplicity, that is liability. Meaning, a liability is called what we owe to someone, or what he owes to someone is considered his liability. So what is his asset? His asset is $100 minus what is his liability? His liability is $50, meaning his total equity is what? 100 minus 50 is equal to $50. Meaning the total wealth he has is what? The total wealth he has is actually $50, even though he has $100 in assets. Because he has $50 in liabilities, 100 minus 50 is equal to $50. His total equity is $50. Islam's concept of wealth is a lot closer to the concept of what we call equity in accounting than anything else. Why is that? And I will go into this in just a second. Why is that? Because Islam wants us to be free of debts and to expand our equity so that whatever we possess, we can give in charity and we can give zakat on it. Islam does not consider taxable that which you owe, because that's not yours. That's not zakatable. You can't give charity on it because it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to someone else anyway. It's a liability. You owe it to someone. Therefore, Islam's concept of wealth is a lot closer in the accounting sense to what we call equity. So if somebody has $100 in his pocket, but he owes 50 of that to someone else, his equity or his wealth, total wealth, quote unquote, is what? $50 is what he owns. So I just wanted you to keep that in mind, just as we go into the next few slides. Now, the flip side of that, if there are any accountants listening, there's another very basic equation in accounting, and I have to discuss this. If we're going to talk about the concept of wealth, I have to discuss these concepts. You cannot get over these. What is called net income. Net income. Net income is equal to revenue minus expenses. Now, we just talked about Islam's concept is a lot closer to what we call equity. However, most people's concept of what wealth is this: net income. Whatever you earn, which is your revenue. So let's say, assume for argument's sake, someone is earning $100 a month and his expenses for that month are $40. What is his net income? His take home, or what he actually is able to save, or what he's actually, let's not call it saving because I know that's a loaded term. His net income will then be 100 minus 40 is equal to $60. His net income is $60. Islam in particular, now this is a very interesting question. How many of people who think that they know a little bit about accounting? In order for you to truly understand your religion, and this is what this fascinated me when I started exploring this subject, not for this particular lecture, but whenever I listen to this, it's near impossible for you to be a good Muslim without knowing a little bit about accounting. because our assets minus liability is equal to our equity. We have to know what our equity is, because based on our equity, we have to determine what our material possessions are. And then based on those material possessions, we have to determine what portion of those do we owe and we pay in zakat and what we don't. If you don't know this, you cannot calculate your zakat. And if you cannot calculate your zakat, you cannot give it. And if you cannot give it, you are sinful. Therefore, some basic understanding of accounting is absolutely, absolutely necessary. What are assets? What are liabilities? What is equity? What is net income? What is revenue? What is expenses, etc.? Now, I gave you two, I guess we can call them both two fundamental, two basic accounting equations, right? I gave you both of them. Equity is equal to assets minus liabilities. Net income is equal to revenue minus expenses. Islam's financial system, the financial system that Islam wants to prop up, that Islam wants us to imbibe in our lives, and Islam wants us to practice, is equity and asset based. Because Islam wants us to increase our charity. If we do not increase our equity, if we do not increase our assets, we cannot give a lot of zakat, we cannot give a lot of charity. Islam's financial system is equity and asset based. Whereas the Western financial systems that we live in are mostly income and debt / interest based. Now, what does that mean? Islam wants you to be asset wealthy. Islam wants you to increase your equity by increasing your assets and reducing your liabilities. I will discuss this in the next few slides. Islam hates people going into debts, and Islam and Allah and His Messenger do not and will not and cannot and have never tolerated interest-based debts. Islam wants to get rid of liabilities as much as possible. And Islam wants to increase people's assets as much as possible so that based upon that assets, you can give zakat. Eventually, based on that assets, when you increase your assets, my fault, I misspoke, based on your equity, you can pay zakat. Okay? The Western financial system, because it's income and debt based, is mostly concerned with what? How much you earn in a given year, and whatever you earn, it doesn't matter what your expenses are, with the exception of a few, you can write those expenses off. You have to pay taxes on what you earned on your income. Whereas Islam wants you to give zakat on what? Quote unquote, if you want to call it a religious tax, zakat is not really a tax. But if you want to call it that, what does Islam want you to give your charity / zakat on? It wants you to give charity on your equity. Islam wants you to be wealthy in the sense of equity, whereas most Western systems rely on net income as the measure of your wealth. That is a key difference between Islam's financial system and Western financial systems. Inshallah, if I get a chance, I don't know if I'm going to prepare that lecture. That might be a very lengthy lecture. I'll give you what the difference between the Western financial system and Islamic financial system, etc. What fundamental accounting equations, what a T ledger is, and how fiat currency works, etc. I don't want to get into all of that in this lecture, but I just want you to know Islam's financial system is equity-based. And because Islam's financial system is equity-based, Islam wishes to reduce what? Islam wishes to maximize assets and charity. And Islam wants you to reduce your debts and liabilities so that you can spend less, save more, and based on what you save and based on what you possess, you can give charity. Also, when you are wealthy in the equity sense of the word, when you have no debts on you and you have a lot of assets, that will cause you to become independent, financially capable, and be a productive member of society. People who are in debts, people who owe stuff to others, are actually a lot worse off. Much more worse off. Why? And this is one of the reasons that our Prophet ﷺ, in this hadith narrated by Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, that it was narrated by Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to say in his prayers, "Oh Allah, I seek refuge with you from sin and heavy debt." So someone said to him, how often do you seek refuge from heavy debt? He said, when a man gets into debt, he speaks, he tells lies, and he makes promises and he breaks it. It causes a lot of personal problems when people go into debts. Why is that? They must lie in order to say, I don't have the money, I'm sorry, I cannot pay it right now, blah, blah, blah. Or he must make promises and he has to break them. Meaning, okay, I'll pay you tomorrow, I'll pay you tomorrow, I'll pay you tomorrow. And every time the debt collector comes, he cannot pay it and he has to continue to lie about it. Islam wants you to maximize and wants us to maximize our assets, maximize our wealth by increasing our assets and reducing our debts. And therefore, Islam wants us to spend less and save more. But remember, I am not giving you fatwas, but Islam does tolerate debt when absolutely necessary, but hates it that you should take debt unless it is absolutely necessary. Meaning, if a situation comes in which, now what is absolutely necessary? This will also be given, the definition of what is absolutely necessary will also be given by the Sharia. What we think is absolutely necessary is not absolutely necessary. That vacation we think we want to take so that we can put it on the credit card and continue to pay 16% interest for the next 12 months is not absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary means something life-threatening. You have medical bills without getting some kind of medical surgery, you might die, or your quality of life might get shot, or you are running out of food and you don't have anywhere to live. If something dire like that presents itself, yes, you can go into debts. But that is only when absolutely necessary. But Islam does not tolerate interest. However, if it comes to those kind of ugly situations, then Islam will give you leeway for interest only if you're dying and in dire need of money in order to save your life. Then there is some leeway. But in general, in order to go on a vacation, taking debts, in order to spend on expensive electronic equipments, taking debts, and then putting that onto interest, then is absolutely not allowed. It's narrated by Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala anha that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, do you know who is bankrupt? They, the Sahaba, said, the one who has no money, who is without money, is bankrupt. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, indeed, the bankrupt of a nation are those who come on the day of resurrection with prayers, fasting, and charity, but also with insults, slander, consuming wealth, shedding blood, and beating others. The oppressed will each be given from his good deeds. If his good deeds run out before the justice is fulfilled, then the sins will be cast upon him and he will be thrown into the hellfire. Let's ponder this over for a second. Why does Islam hate debts? The reason Islam hates debts is because of this reason: consuming other people's wealth. When you take money, when you consume money that does not belong to you, it belongs to someone else, you owe that person. And when you owe that person, if you die in a state without having paid back that debt, without having paid back that debt to that person, you will come on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and in order to repay that debt that you did not satisfy in your life, do you know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do? Allah will take your good deeds, including your prayers, including your hajj, including your charity, including everything that you thought, good deeds that you did in this life, and will give it to that person whose wealth you consumed and never paid back. And because your good deeds now belong to that person, they are no longer in your account, but let's assume that if the debt is still not satisfied, if there are more debts than you have good deeds, then what's going to happen is that person's bad deeds will be put on you. And you will have to pay for those bad deeds. How? By being thrown into the fire of hell. I cannot emphasize how big this is. Not just now, everywhere, every time I listen to some wealth coach or personal coach or a financial fitness coach, etc., one thing that they always say, don't take debts unless absolutely necessary. It is a characteristic of the wealthy. People who, you want to be wealthy? Fine. If you don't want to, if it's hard for you to, think of the advice that Allah and His Messenger is giving you, I'll give you some secular advice. And the secular advice goes as follows. The people who are wealthy don't take loans. They don't take loans based on interest. You know what they do? They spend less, they save more. That's what they do. It is a characteristic of the wealthy in America and all over the world. They don't like to go into debts. So if you want to be wealthy, go ahead. Don't take debts. Now, another problem with debt is modern debts are never, ever without interest or riba. You cannot go into debt in this world today without consuming some or giving some kind of interest. And this is narrated by Imam Muslim in his Sahih, that narrated by Jabir, radiyallahu ta'ala anha, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, cursed is the one who consumes interest or riba, and the one who pays it, and the one who writes it down, and the two who witness it. And he said, they are all the same. Meaning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is removed from a person who does this. So let's not go into debts. Let's not take debts unless absolutely necessary. In conclusion, what did we discuss today? We talked about 3 things today. Number 1, we talked about the concept of who the ultimate authority or the ultimate owner of everything is, and how we must act as his vicegerent when it comes to our wealth, what we must act on his behalf when it comes to our wealth. And if we are going to use our wealth according to his wishes, we talked about a little bit of what our wealth is and what Islam deems to be wealth and what Islam deems to be your possessions. On next week's talk, inshallah, I'm going to talk about how you should earn a living, how you come into possession of these material things, and why earning a halal living is the second biggest obligation on us Muslims. Now this, I will present evidence for this. You will think that after the biggest obligation, which is the prayer, the second biggest obligation would be zakat, but it is not. The second biggest obligation is actually earning a halal living. Why is that? Because without it, we cannot give zakat. If we're poor, we cannot give zakat. If we're poor, we cannot give charity. If we're poor, we cannot go to Hajj. We cannot go to Umrah. If we're poor, we're going to end up fasting whether we like it or not. Poor people fast not because they want to, but because they have to. And inshallah, next week, we are also going to talk about, after you've earned it in a halal manner, what do we spend it on? that is going to be, inshallah, my next week's topic. Jazakallah khair for watching. Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdika wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. I am going to now open the floor for questions, answers. So I'm going to stop the sharing and I'm going to unmute everybody. If you have any questions, comments, etc., and if you want to mute yourself, now is the time. Is that you, Husna?
अस्सलाम वालेकुम फैसल।
वालेकुम अस्सलाम खाला।
कैसे हो बेटा? बहुत अच्छा था आज का लेक्चर, बहुत शुरू से अच्छा सा तुमने लेके चले हो, बहुत अच्छी तरह समझ में आया।
Thank you, खाला। Okay, anybody else? Any questions, any comments, anything? Okay, inshallah, if that is it, we will go next week on, we will talk about next week on the two other topics that remain, which is going to be how we earn and how we spend our money. Jazakallah khair for watching.
Hafiz.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Hafiz. Hafiz.